All right, you know you have a gun in your car. You come out of your house, you see someone halfway through the window. Um, if you were to believe that this person was a threat or had the capacity to use deadly force, how do juries look at that?
Well,
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about a few things when it comes to using force or deadly force in defense of your car. Now, we're going to be answering some questions. Hey, is this thing part of an extension of my castle? Does the castle doctrine protect me? What if it's not considered my castle? Can I just straight up, use of deadly force in defense of property law? We'll be talking about the states that allow that. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And Emily has some housekeeping.
I do. Thank you. I'd like to address this directly to the haters. So, in a previous video last week,
I don't know what she's going to say.
I mentioned that I once traded in a SIG for a Ruger, and I got a lot of shit for that. And I want you to know, first of all, I have a boatload of guns, and that is not the only SIG that was in my possession. So calm down. Number one. Number two, if anyone has ever owned a SIG P238, you know that it sucks. It sucks. Have you owned one? Did you get one for your wife?
No.
It's a good lady gun.
Somebody offered me one time,
But yeah,
and I declined.
It's a lady gun. It's a lady gun. But it's like, you're looking for a purse gun because ultimately, like I got guns that I wear on my person. I got the guns for the car. I got guns for the bedside table. That's a purse gun.
Do you have a shower gun?
Not yet. That's a purse gun. And I just didn't, it's really, really tiny, and I just didn't like it. It didn't make me feel safe. And yes, I traded in for a Ruger for an LCR. And I like it. It's a revolver. It's a purse gun. It was the only revolver I owned, my first revolver. And I got money back in the deal. And so, win, win, win. Okay? Okay?
Anything else on the agenda?
Oh yeah, don't comment about my hair. Every time I let my hair air dry, people will leave comments. Don't do that. Sometimes your toddlers get the best of you in the morning and your hair air dries. Don't do that.
All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this one.
All right.
So we're talking about, and I had several questions last week, and so I thought, hey, this is a good one. If enough people are asking questions about it, we should talk about it. Use of force in defense of your car. Now, little twist on this one. There are a lot of situations where, hey, you're in your car, someone's trying to carjack you, someone's trying to rip you out. Let's say a mob surrounds you in your car. We saw a lot of that in the Summer of Love. This one is a little bit different. We're talking about nobody's inside your car. It's sitting peacefully in your driveway, in your street. I talked to a guy last week. He came out and discovered there's three guys with like a jack and tire irons, like trying to steal his tires and rims. So, this comes up a lot. People burglarizing cars, or you know what happens in my neighborhood? Just dudes walking up and down the street, just like hitting handles, just see if any of them open.
The kids call that hitting licks.
Hitting licks. So, all right. Now, what happens if you see this going on? Do you get to use force or deadly force in defense of your car?
That's an excellent question. So let's talk about, should we talk about where the car is, or should we just talk about generally?
So let's talk general. Then I want to talk about when it's your castle.
All right. So generally speaking, there are very few states that will allow you to use deadly force strictly in defense of property. And people have this misconception that, oh, well, my vehicle it's a real big piece of property. It's real expensive. It's very important. So I should be allowed to, Grand Theft Auto, right?
Sure.
I should be allowed to shoot. In fact, lots of people are like, oh yeah, heck yeah, the law says you can shoot while your car's being driven away. You gotta stop that crime. Unfortunately speaking, there are very few states that allow deadly force for just defense against property crimes.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying, this is when no human being is in danger.
Yes, no, stop with the you're telling me that when they turn around and they have a gun pointed at my face that I can't defend myself. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about they are just getting ready to drive off in your vehicle. They're not driving towards you, nothing else. They're just getting ready to drive off in your vehicle. And the states that actually do allow some level of deadly force for property crimes only, it's still probably not a good idea for reasons that we can expound upon.
Yeah, so we're talking about pure defensive property at this point. And that's all to say, hey, these situations are extremely dynamic. What level of force would be justified in stopping the interference with your property? Could you go out and could the situation change into something else? Absolutely, it happens all the time. And so generally what most states say is that you can use force, think not deadly force, something that wouldn't cause somebody to die, wouldn't cause them to lose a limb, wouldn't cause them to lose function of an organ, that kind of stuff. You could use force to stop interference with property. That's the overwhelming majority of states. And so what we see a lot of times, folks go outside, say, hey, get away from my car, and then the situation turns into something completely different, not a pure defense of property crime, and then maybe it turns into a use of deadly force, where use of deadly force might be justified. And so, all right, we kind of have that scenario. We'll put that aside just for a moment. So you could use force, situation develops into something else, maybe now they're a threat to you, to somebody else. All right, that situation, we can talk about that situation. But just going outside, because this is what everybody imagines. I hear my car alarm go off in the middle of the night. You got your bedside table gun, you run outside, you see somebody breaking into your window, or they have their body halfway through the window just grabbing things. The question, can I shoot? The answer is probably no.
Right. And I mean, I understand that it's very, very frustrating because you're being violated and people are criming on you, and you want to, the police aren't going to get there to help you. So whatever they're doing, if you don't stop them, they're just going to get to continue to do it. And I get that. I understand that. However, I actually got a phone call, and we didn't talk about this offline. I actually got a phone call about a month ago in which someone had, in fact, shot at someone breaking into their car, called me, talked him through it. The reason why that it was more concerning than not, and this is what you always want to think about, is it turns out that the kid he shot at was in fact a kid. It's like 14 years old. And that's one of those things where it's like...
Have you seen 14-year-olds today, though?
Maybe.
They're like juiced up monsters.
Are they?
Some of them.
I don't spend a lot of time around high schoolers, kids, actually. I'd rather not. They're kind of
sure
mildly terrifying.
Fair point.
But I mean, that's just one of those things, is that, yes, it is very, very frustrating if you end up shooting the 14-year-old of the family down the street from you, and he's just being a little idiot with his friends. The chances that you end up getting arrested, going through the system, and being punished for that because a jury doesn't like to see 14-year-olds dead, pretty high.
Yeah, and there's an overwhelming, hey, we want to preserve lives, we value lives over things. And so when we're talking about pure defensive property, no person is in danger. Other than the burglar, whenever you whenever you go out to confront them, the law generally disallows a use of deadly force under those kind of black and white circumstances. Now, a question that we often get that kind of follows this discussion is, hey, I thought this was an extension of my castle. Castle doctrine, you hear about castle doctrine applications. And in most states, what is castle doctrine? It usually is an added layer of self-defense, usually through a legal presumption of reasonableness. Some benefit at trial or instruction to a jury saying, hey, we presume that what this person did was okay. The state can always disprove these things, but usually you start on the right side of the law. And when does castle doctrine come up in the context of a vehicle?
Well, it's when you are inside it. You have to be inhabiting your castle in order for it to be your castle. So you would be inside of your vehicle, and then someone would be forcefully and unlawfully entering or attempting to enter, or forcefully and unlawfully removing you or attempting to remove you. So if you are watching your vehicle being broken into from afar, that is not your castle.
Yeah, and before we get into the states that's, there is a scenario where you could use deadly force in defense of property. We'll go through that list in just a second. Kind of a secondary question that kind of comes up in this discussion is, hey, guess what? I store my gun in my vehicle. We could talk about whether that's wise or unwise. But all right, you have a gun in your car. You come out of your house. You see someone halfway through the window. If you were to believe that this person was a threat or had the capacity to use deadly force, how do juries look at that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I will say it probably is unwise, and also I never take that pistol out of the car.
Yeah,
never, which drives my husband bonkers. But it's, so I get it. So for everybody out there on both sides of that equation, I get both sides. But we have this, this potential scenario of they're breaking into my car, and I'm going to go confront them, and they may have my own gun to use against me. What does that mean I can do? I mean, you're going to have police and prosecutors out there who say that means don't confront them. Don't put yourself in the situation.
You knew they had a gun.
Exactly, right. However, that's not always reasonable. That's not always what a jury would consider as well. And it can, I guess, just, I will back that up and say it really is going to depend on what a jury does think about that. In fact, we have a story for everything. We've been doing this for so long. We have a story for everything. This one was about a year ago now. Somebody called me with that exact scenario, and he did in fact shoot at them. He hit one of the guys. There were several. They got away in a getaway car. They actually dropped the guy who was shot off at the hospital, and on the hospital footage they could see the guy, and this is what saved his bacon. They could see the guys. They dropped the guy who was shot at the hospital and then took the gun they had stolen from the guy who talked to his car and chunked it in the bushes. So they could actually found his stolen gun on the guy who got shot.
Wow.
And they watched it on the footage, which that's great. That's great evidence that he had your gun. He was dangerous. And like I was saying, look, he pointed a gun at me. I'm sure it was dark, but I'm sure he pointed a gun at me. That's when I shot him. In a situation where it's really hard to prove, you could always have police and prosecutors be like, you didn't point a gun. You made that up. You have the reason to lie because you're the one who's about to be charged with crime for shooting the guy. And then you have to have a jury sort it out. So there's very rarely going to be that distinct video footage in your favor. And so much of self-defense comes down to who is more believable on the jury stand.
Yeah.
Is it you or is it state's witnesses?
And I'll say it does, talking about that situation where, all right, you'd be justified in using force, dynamic situation ensues, you find yourself in a position where you have to use deadly force. Knowing that, hey, this person may have a gun, partially limited to the fact that they broke into my car and I keep a gun in there. If you are, saying things to the cops like, hey, I thought he had a gun in his hand, I had a gun in my car. When we look at did somebody act reasonably, that definitely goes to whether the person acted reasonably or not. So, there's a lot going on there. But I think we want to talk now about the states that have some use of deadly force in defense of property alone. There's only a handful of these. I was actually really surprised. And again, caveats. Know your state's law. If you live in one of these states, make sure you understand it. And I actually have we're very familiar with Texas's law, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and why these might not be as much protection as you think. But we have Arizona, Florida, Illinois, surprisingly, Mississippi, Oregon, and Texas.
Surprised about Oregon, too.
Yeah, so these are states where there is a situation contemplated in the law where a use of deadly force in a pure defense of property could exist. And I'll give you Texas's law as an example, just because we know that one really, really well. It looks very similar to our self-defense law: reasonable belief, immediately necessary. Really specific conditions here in Texas: theft in the nighttime, criminal mischief in the nighttime, burglary, arson, and then that using any force less than deadly force would subject the actor, the defender in this situation, to deadly force or serious bodily injury or death. So there's a lot of stinking hoops in Texas, and everybody likes to think Texas is the wild, wild west. What have you seen in these pure defensive property cases? My experience is they do not go well.
They do not go well. Even though there is law here contemplating that you could defend simple property. First of all, police don't like it. Prosecutors don't like it, which means you are going to end up in the system. That's why that's important. And then once you're in the system, you're presenting it to a jury.
Yeah.
And you got to figure out, is my jury okay with this or not? Because they're going to be asked, did you behave reasonably? And it's going to be an uphill battle because there are no legal presumptions. So it's just start from scratch, square one, convince a jury that you did what a ordinary and prudent person would have done in the same situation, which is not supposed to mean this, but practically speaking, it means every one of those jurors is going to go back and say, would I have done it? Would I have shot? I'm reasonable.
Yeah. And one more kind of wrench to throw in the mechanics of this. We talked about that, hey, using anything less than deadly force would subject the actor to serious bodily injury or death. Texas's law is a little bit disjunctive. The other scenario would be this property couldn't otherwise be recovered. And so what does that look like? Well, you're going to have your juror saying, you had car insurance. You could just recover this by making an insurance claim. And when I talk to folks about it...
Did you have, I forget what mine's called, but that, the GPS monitoring and the theft
Yeah.
Forget which service I have. Do you have that?
Right.
Does that, I mean, can you recover it that way?
And
Probably. You
then-
know where it is.
And it's not like we have a case on this, but the example that I talk to folks about is like, if they stole your mother's ashes, that's a unique property that you are not going to get back
Yep.
by filing an insurance claim. You know, really sentimental property. You know, the car that we're spending the rest of your life in prison over.
What kind of car?
Emily's true colors. But you see how there's a lot of different factors going on here, but we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please leave us a comment below. Let us know, would you consider shooting over just property? Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.